Hello and welcome to the Fastest 50 podcast. I'm Alistair McDonald, Business Development Director at Ward Hadaway, and I'm very pleased to say that my guest today is Joanna Feeley. Joanna is the founder and chief exec of TrendBible, a powerhouse in the trend future forecasting, and now a published author with her brilliant book, Trend Leader. Joanna has won multiple awards, including Entrepreneur of the Year at the Entrepreneurs Forum Awards, Creative Entrepreneur of the Year in the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, and Joanna has also been the keynote speaker at our own Fastest 50. Joanna, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you here. Really appreciate you doing that. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with what trend forecasting actually is and why you decided to pursue that as a career.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a mysterious behind-the-scenes industry, really. So trend forecasting really is just a method by which you can create a map for the future. So businesses always want to have a strategy and a plan for the future. And trend forecasting allows you to explore what a possible future might look like and what a probable future might look like and what kind of forces might shape the way that consumers and businesses are driven. So good trend forecasting should also allow you to see what a preferable future or a desirable future for you looks like. And a good map of the future has both those elements: what's probable, what's possible, and what's preferable. And that means what's preferable for the company, but also what's preferable for their future consumer. And that means that we might be putting this map of the future together for companies 2 to 5 to even 10 years ahead of time. So they're planning ahead. It's part of a strategic skill set, really. And in terms of how I got into it, I didn't know it existed as a career option or even an industry until I was at university in my second year, and I studied fashion design at Kingston University. And they had a module where they introduced us to forecasting for fashion. Right. And it really was the perfect alignment, really, of my skills. It's sort of part science, so you collect data, you need to collect information about who your future consumer will be and how they're going to live and what will influence them. But it's also a creative act as well. You have to use your imagination. You have to be able to imagine a better future or a different future in order that you can activate it. So that was the point when I realised this is the industry for me. It wasn't necessarily fashion design, but it was very specifically this piece about trend forecasting.
And, you know, we were just chatting earlier about sort of the emergence of things like AI, which is it's a topic for everybody. And, you know, I was interested that you said that's something that's been around in sort of forecasting and things like, it feels like the fashion industry is something that's an early adopter of new tech.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few industries that always love to have their eye on the future. And historically, those have been things like the oil industry, the fashion industry, the automotive industry. And typically, if you've got a product or you supply something that has that sort of long chain effect, then you are working years in the future. And so those industries tend to use forecasting more because they're trying to sort of anticipate the supply and demand. And fashion is one of those industries. Actually, the fashion industry's probably changed a lot over the past 20 years since I've been running my business. You know, we're able now to manufacture goods in days and weeks and supply very, very quickly. And that's been aided by things like Amazon, where it's able to actually supply and deliver in a very short time frame. So it has evolved and changed very, very quickly. Not all for a good reason, but it has changed.
Yeah. And just something else that struck us when you were talking there about the sort of mapping out the different futures. Does that feel like you can sort of influence things a bit?
Yes, and you should.
Yeah.
And you should, I think. You know, if there's one thing we're sure of is that, like, the world needs better ideas at the minute. And I think part of that is being able to map out a route to a preferable future. And I think if you ask a lot of people what they think the future looks like, they'll say, well, if I read the newspapers, it's all doom and gloom and we're headed in one direction towards a singular future, especially around something like the environmental issues that we face. But actually, there are a whole host of people working on what a more positive environmental future would look like. And so, yeah, part of the act of forecasting isn't just to take data, because data is backwards looking.
Right.
And for all AI can be brilliant, AI is basically still using data to extrapolate, and it can kind of breadcrumb a little bit of what the future might look like. It's fairly effective at giving you a probable future for maybe 3-6 months time.
Right.
But actually, if you want to forecast 5-10 years time, and you want to do that in a way that aligns specifically with your industry, your company, your audience, then you need to have a human brain involved in that. You need to be able to do the thinking around that, and not just one human brain either. You need to have a diverse set of perspectives to be able to map that out.
I think it's really healthy to hear that, because we were talking about kids and what do you advise them to do in terms of their future, because AI is changing things so quickly. But even something like trend forecasting and looking at the future, like, yes, AI's got a part of it, but you need humans and you need that human insight. And as you say, a diversity of different kinds of insights to give you that picture of where things could go.
I think it's the most important thing to remember when we feel like we're being driven by these tech engines, I think, is to remember that we do have autonomy. And I think autonomy is probably the single most important thing that we have to remember to hang on to. I know there's a lot of chat at the minute about what skills do we need in a world where AI can do some of those basic repeatable tasks that maybe humans did before. But we do have autonomy, and I mean that as a business leader. I mean that as governments, we have choices that we can make, and for every choice we make, there will be a consequence and an outcome.
You mentioned the fact that it was like when you were at university, and that's obviously quite early days, and your business is in the Northeast. So what is it that you enjoy about operating a business in the Northeast, and what advantages does that give you?
I always knew I wanted to move back to the Northeast. So my first job was in New York, and then I came back to London and just had this, like, the pull of home, I suppose. For me, the Northeast is home. I was brought up in Northumberland, and I never actually got the chance to live in Newcastle, even though it was sort of the closest city when I was growing up, and I always sort of romanticised that as like the big city for me. So I wonder whether it was a little bit of that I always wanted to live back in Newcastle, and I have been back here now for 20 years. But the best thing about growing a business here, because a lot of my friends when I left London said they thought it was actually a really bad idea, especially working in the world of trends, where typically my competitors are all based in the sort of fashion capitals of New York and Amsterdam and Paris and London. And lots of people said it probably wasn't a good idea to try and relocate to Newcastle. So it wasn't a convenience factor at the start. So there was definitely the pull of home. But the thing that I've loved most about it is the sense of community. I'm plugged into all sorts of different Northeast communities. I'm plugged into the creative Northeast community and broadly the business community. There are lots of little sort of pockets of people. If you have a problem or a question, there is usually somebody you can phone up and say, can you help me with this? Or do you know somebody who can? It's very friendly, very open. I've had so much free mentoring over the years. I can't even tell you, just so many people willing to go for a coffee or just help you solve a problem. Like, it's unbelievable the lengths that people will go to. And I obviously do that for other people as well. It's super friendly business community, I think.
And that isn't the case everywhere, I think. And one of the other guests that we've had on the podcast, Roman, he's operating internationally, and I was asking about that, and he referred to kind of what you described there as the Geordie superpower. Yeah. Just like people are willing to talk to each other, and they're willing to take that phone call and give their time up. So that's interesting. One of the other things that I wanted to ask in terms of you running your business, like we've referred to the fact that your trend forecasting and your future forecasting, and you're looking at all these different permutations about what might happen. There's a lot of uncertainty there. Running a business, you want some degree of certainty. So how do you deal with that sort of constant strategy, constant forward looking with the sort of the uncertainty in your own business? And I guess like my team's grown as our business has grown. Historically, I used to do lots of work with like our partners and our and it was all about strategy and like I think like that a lot of the time. But because I've got a team now, there's like day-to-day things that happen, and God, there's too much work there, and what do I do about that? So I'm just interested how you deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, my entire job is about uncertainty, because the future isn't, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't have any special powers that like enable me to see the future. So in that respect, I've had a long time to get really comfortable with uncertainty. It's kind of an ingredient of my day-to-day world, really. I'm trying to reduce uncertainty for large corporate businesses all over the world as my day job. And then in my job as a managing director, I have to reduce the uncertainty for my business as well. And, you know, things like the pandemic, I think, really put me through my paces in terms of my appetite for uncertainty. I thought I kind of enjoyed it and understood it as an ingredient of understanding and working with the future. And then when it actually upended, and, you know, we would call that a sort of black swan event, where it's an unpredictable event that has consequences that are global and that infiltrate everything. And they are really rare. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be really interesting to live through it and read, because you can theorise and read about black swan events, but actually to live through one, I knew that we were going to get that experience of how do you now put a forecast out into the world, or how do you now put a forecast together for a large corporate global DIY company, you know, what's actually going to change and what's going to happen and what will stay the same. I suppose I've had a mixed relationship with uncertainty all the while, but I think I've learned that element we spoke about before, that autonomy, the fact that we have to accept that we do have choices. There are forces that drive us, for sure. There definitely are. Those are social, they're cultural, there are barriers, there are boundaries. We can't ignore that. But where we say to ourselves, I do have autonomy, where is that autonomy? What is the preferred future and how might I get there? That's a really good thing to kind of hold yourself to account, I suppose, in the storms when they do come. You have to be able to grab hold of something and focus on that. And I think being able to think, what would a preferred future look like to me, is a really good way to start with that.
One of the things that I think is quite interesting about trend forecasting and looking forward, and you mentioned that you're working with big corporate organisations. Has there ever been an occasion where you've predicted something that would happen, it consequently didn't happen, and like what's the impact then? Like what happens in that circumstance?
Yeah. That's always the big fear, is that, you know, you can create a sort of map for a company, and that there is that sort of black swan event that just turns everything on its head. And actually that's where the pandemic was very useful, because we could look at the forecast we pulled together in 2018 for 2020 and say, well, how does this huge black swan event impact that? And actually those forecasts stood up really well. We offered to go back to every single client that had taken a forecast from us in 2018 and 2019 and examine it and reforecast it if necessary. We had to let sort of 6-8 months pass to sort of let things settle a little bit. But we actually didn't correct those forecasts. There was already pre-pandemic a big drive towards people centering their life at home. And so we've done this entire piece around people being more connected to home. There was loads of data that suggested people wanted to work from home. They just didn't have the means. Well, all of a sudden they got the means, and businesses said, we suddenly trust you to have office equipment from the office at home, spend your time there and manage your time accordingly. So life caught up with people's desires and intentions. Yeah. That was reassuring, but I do remember getting it wrong in the early days. And there was a really specific cultural moment that I was trying to capture in about, I think it was about 2011. And we were forecasting a trend for the sort of the home interiors decor market. And there was a film that was due out, which was The Great Gatsby with Leonardo DiCaprio in it. I'm sure it was 2011. It's like imprinted on my brain. And that film had been slated for release for 2 or 3 years. And quite often you can find out what books are going to be published, what movies are being filmed and will come out. And they're really nice ways to kind of braille culture to see if there are any connections there between the types of books and films and TV shows. It tells you a little bit about what's going to influence consumer culture. And The Great Gatsby is obviously very highly stylized, sort of 1920s. It's got a really particular feel to it. And something went wrong in the casting of that. I think there was an issue with one of the actors. They had to reshoot a lot of scenes. And so we'd forecast that there would be this sort of Great Gatsby-esque design influence that would happen in 2011. And the film ended up being delayed by, I think, 2 years, something like that. So the important thing to remember there is, if we forecast trends from only one data point, that is very high risk. And lo and behold, I don't do that anymore. We don't forecast from one data point anymore. But also what it reminds us of is that if we don't have those cultural points around us, then we're not really drawn to trends. So the consumers that were walking into Tesco and Asda and Matalan weren't walking in there primed with this idea that they were looking for a particular aesthetic because the film hadn't come out. And so if you throw a trend out, it won't just attract people. It's about the entire ecosystem that makes a trend come to life. There has to be social, cultural indicators that draw people towards something. That is always the case. You cannot simply have a trend like, I don't know if you've seen the little Labubu dolls that have been so massive in fashion. Those events don't just happen because a company decides to produce a product. There has to be an ecosystem around that, around nostalgia and comfort. There has to be a shift somewhere that's broader than just the consumption of the product to make something really happen.
Really
so that was it was a really early lesson for me in the fact that you always have kind of roots to a trend. You always have at least three points to a trend, not just one film.
Growing any sort of business doesn't come without its challenges. What do you think's been the hardest part for you in terms of growing TrendBible?
So many things, really, but I think reflecting on sort of like a 27-year career, I think I can now see that when you have like a technical skill set, or in my experience, a creative skill set, you set out with, confidence in your expertise. And, I just didn't have the other half of it. And it is half of it, at least, which is the business expertise. So I could forecast trends. I could do that really comfortably, really well. And I've got better at that as time's gone on. I've continued to develop those skills. But that comes really naturally and easily to me. And the other side of the business, whether that is the finances, whether that is sales, whether that is marketing, the entire commercial arm has been a massive learning curve. And I really think I've only cracked that in the last 2 or 3 years.
Really?
Yeah, I think we'll only see the growth implications of me learning that, starting just to see it now and in the next couple of years. So I think that's the tricky bit, is that how quickly do you step out of your technical skill set, your expertise, and start to explore the other sides of the business? And you can do it different ways. I always hired other people to be the commercial thinkers in my business so that I could stick to the piece that was my skill set. And that can get you so far, I think. But my belief now, certainly from my experience, is that you have to go and plug that knowledge in. So I did a couple of years ago the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Programme. I've been a member of the Entrepreneurs Forum. I've done their Scale Up Academy. I've done everything that I can to improve my commercial skills, whether that is marketing, sales or finances, to round out my skill set. Because when you decide to be the MD or the chief exec, you cannot just do it with your kind of singular expertise. And it took me a really long time to figure out even the people side of it. I think, the people side of it is something that I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to go and hire a people and culture manager. So for a long time, we had a people and culture manager, even as a 12-person business, right, which is really unusual to have that full time inside a business. That was just me avoiding my responsibilities and avoiding the opportunity to upskill so that I could manage people effectively myself. And it's only again recently that I've felt confident that I've learned enough to do that well. In a way, what I've done is I've invested in other people's expertise where I lacked it myself. That's absolutely fine. You have to do that. But I think as I get more confident, I'm realising there are things there that I've learned how to do those things now, but it's taken me a really long time.
It's working on the bits that you're not good at, and you feel exposed when you do that.
And you don't necessarily enjoy those, but I've had to learn to love them as part of the success of the business. I can't make the business successful if I haven't got engaged, happy, rewarded team members, or if I haven't figured out what the levers to pull in a financial crisis are when that hits a business. You need to know where will we do best, what won't work. And I've learned all of it. I would love to have learned those things sooner, but I am really impatient with myself with those things as well. I think I wish I'd known that 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It would have been a really different growth trajectory. And for me, I feel like it's been slow, but a lot of people tell me that that's not necessarily the truth. It's just, I think as founders, often you really push yourself to see the results as quickly as possible.
So that probably leads us on to another question. Like, again, it's reflecting on my own experience of this recently. So, like, given that you've led the business and known how to be successful by doing the doing, and then you've opened that up and you've brought people in with different skill sets and things, those people with different skill sets, like, aren't going to be motivated by the same things that you are. So as a leader, how do you motivate those people that, like, don't think the same way as you?
I hire people who are excellent at what they do and who are enthusiastic about what they do, and they want to learn how to be excellent at it. If they're not already, usually they are excellent and they want to be even better. And I think, if you, in my opinion, especially, trend forecasting is a fantastic and rare career. So if you were to go into it and you were unmotivated, there's something really wrong there. So, and that's the truth with whether you're a marketing person, whether you're a commercial director, it doesn't matter what the role is. The motivation element, if you are pulling somebody through treacle to get them where you want them to be, something's not right. So I think I can recognise that, and I'm very lucky that I've always run a business full of people who love their jobs, they love the industry, but in terms of people seeing things the same as me, the important bit for me is that I have a vision for where the business is headed, and that I have a 3-year plan and a 1-year plan, and that everybody vaguely understands the 3-year plan, but they deeply understand the 1-year plan. And so we spend a lot of time on understanding the vision for the year ahead and the plan for the year ahead. And again, allowing the team autonomy for their contribution towards that. What will they do in 12 months' time? How will they look back at their contribution and understand what contribution they made towards the goals of the business? So that's the only bit that really matters to me, is being able to clearly communicate my vision and to have people understand their role in helping us achieve that. I think that's the most important bit.
So, we've talked about going through a pandemic and black swan moments and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think anybody leading a business is going to go through challenging times. Like, do you have like a certain set of values that guides you through those sort of tough decisions and tough periods?
There's no doubt about it. The pandemic really, it was like panic stations for me. We'd just acquired a really our biggest ever client in China in the pandemic. February of 2020, we celebrated hitting £1 million in turnover for the first time, and we've got pictures of us with like confetti cannons, and everything's great. February 2020, and of course by March, everybody was working from home. We were trying to figure out how to function, and we lost a lot of business, and we lost that Chinese client. It absolutely was panic stations, and I think it was really difficult for me to have seen in the moment what values were able to drive me forward to help me through that time. I've always had like a deep faith in the business. I've always known that it's going somewhere really exciting, and that never left me, actually, even when things were difficult and we had clients that were saying, we just can't commit the budget to this at the minute, and we actually don't want to know anything about the future consumer. We're obsessed with the current consumer in the here and now. We don't want to look forwards. And now obviously I have the hindsight to know that only lasts a little while, because the future consumer or the current consumer starts to change their behaviours, and businesses quite quickly want to keep up with that. So I've always had a lot of faith that the business is exciting, that it's really excellent knowledge for businesses to have. And that's reflected in the fact that we've got, all of these sort of billion-dollar brands as clients, and we're just still quite a small agency. It's just having faith. I think that's the main thing, is just having that faith. And it's not to say it doesn't waver. 2 years ago, transitioned fully into a subscription business. So we're a fully sort of platform-led subscription business now. And that was really brutal. We had to make redundancies. We had to tighten up the team to be able to do that. And it moved us away from working with customers that only wanted to buy maybe one report from us once a year. It took guts to make that decision, and there were consequences. But actually now, on the far end of that, we've had something like an 80% increase in year on year in repeatable customers. It's incredible, the growth we've had as a result of that decision. I do trust my gut instinct, but I will go and sound that out. I will go and speak to people and check that I'm making the right decision. But I'm not sure I would have had the guts to make sort of choices like that had I not been through the pandemic. That really taught me what happens when you don't have choices and circumstances are thrown your way, and you have to lean on your own expertise, your own ability. You have to have faith in the team that are around you. And I think if there's one thing I learned, it was that the team that kind of are there in the greatest success moments and are responsible for the success are also the ones that get you out of it when things are bad.
Fascinating what you say about the subscription thing. Reason I'm so interested in that is that I think for the legal sector, there's a move towards more commoditized subscription-based models. There are some sort of legal startups and things that are offering that just as that's just the way they do it. They don't do the hourly rate thing. And for a number of years, we've had a product called HR Protect, which is a subscription model, and it's dependent on how many employees people have. And our commercial department recently have come up with a fractional GC offering recently, which has taken off very successfully in a short space of time. So I'm looking now at other areas of our business that we can commoditize things and put them into boxes. So I'm just fascinated. The 80% figure is just crazy.
And as I said before, like, these things don't happen in a silo. They happen because the culture around us changes. And there are a couple of things that have happened there is that we're used to subscribing to things like Netflix, for example. So we have this mindset of, you know, we don't just buy a film and pay £10 for it. We now subscribe to content. But also the other sort of changes that have happened around that is trend forecasting will be like HR, will be like advice, in that if I put one report into a business once a year, we know that change is happening. You know, as soon as that report is published, change has happened. And so the reason a subscription is so interesting in the modern world is that people want to be plugged in and feel safe and secure by having access to constant support and reassurance from experts, not just this kind of one-off deep dive of information that has to last them until the next interaction.
Yeah.
So yes, subscriptions are a sensible business model. They give you repeatable income. But actually, for me, it came from a place of saying, I can't live with myself if I just put one or two forecasts into a business once or twice a year, because I know change is happening more regularly than that. So how do I enable my customers to feel like they are updated every time there is something that changes and shifts? And it's much better to have them in a position where they can look at 200 reports a year and dip into the things that really matter to them than just give them one report and say, good luck, see you in a year's time. It just seems like a really old-fashioned way to operate in a world that is, as we know at the minute, the sort of geopolitical situation, economic situation is so changeable.
I think we need to have a conversation because the subscription stuff's really interesting. And from my point of view, in terms of the legal sector, like, the best value that I think clients get from us is where they have that really deep relationship with the lawyer that's looking after them. And I think, you know, there's certain kinds of legal work that is just more transactional, but I think that the deeper that relationship is, the just the better advice you get. And it's that, I think it's the peace of mind. You know, it's for us in terms of our BD and marketing function at Ward Hadaway, a lot of the time, like, it's when people are panicked that they get in touch.
Yeah.
And like,
it's the reassurance factor, isn't it? And knowing that somebody is an expert. And I think that gives me confidence in a world where people are talking about AI and, you know, could it replace a legal requirement? Could it replace a requirement for a trend forecast? To some degree, yes. But actually, the person that needs to take that information and make a decision about it is sometimes in a legally binding situation, or in my case, you know, I might be putting a forecast, or they might be taking an AI forecast to back up a decision they're making that could be a multi-million, if not a multi-billion-dollar decision. And they are the person that the chief exec is going to go to if something goes wrong or right, and quiz them about it and ask them about it. And I've been in that situation myself. I was head of trends at Tesco for 5 years before I set TrendBible up. And if there was a trend that was out in the market that we didn't have at Tesco, it would be me that got the phone call to say, why are we not looking at the way that this customer has changed? And sometimes quite often the answer would be, oh, we have looked at it and we've parked it because of these reasons. This is why the business didn't want to invest in that trend. And this was the rationale. So it's usually not that companies aren't informed. It's that choices will be made along the path as to whether you do or you do not want to take a punt on something. And if there is a trend that is particularly tricky or kind of shocking or destabilising, then companies have a really hard time being able to justify that. And so they do start to panic, and they do want that external expertise, that reassurance that, yep, I know this is an unusual trend to be happening, or consumers are behaving in this new different, strange way, but you need to back it and you need to follow it through, because actually we've got evidence, and we have, you know, a whole system of weak signals that suggest that this trend is going to happen. You're just not going to see any evidence of it for 2 years, and you're going to have to hold tight and be able to be accountable to the board for 2 whole years before this trend happens. But when it happens, people will be, clapping you on the back. So that's how it works.
One of the things that I do to sort of help me to deal with the stresses of a busy job and personal life and all that kind of stuff is like I meditate all the time. I have a subscription to Headspace that work pay for, which I think is great. But a lot of that is about ignoring what's going on and trying to just be present now. And the more that I do that, the better I feel in myself. So I'm just wondering how you balance like that plus running a business where you've got to do it for yourself and you're doing it for other people and remaining sort of grounded. Is that?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And I'm not sure that I've cracked it. I'm not sure it's possible to. I don't know. I suppose everybody has their own coping mechanisms. And the one thing that's difficult for me is that I have ADHD. So when I stop spinning the plates, I just find new plates to spin. So I can be my own worst enemy. Like rest is very difficult for me to actually get hold of. And I've had to learn that rest for me isn't sitting still. And, you know, I think I've tried to meditate a few times and probably set up 5 new businesses as a result. I just can't get my brain to quiet in that way. And so instead of beating myself up about not being able to quieten my brain, I've had to find ways that are more sort of active rest, is how I would describe it, that make me feel sort of less tired and I can feel like I can recuperate, but it's probably not what would look restful to other people. I love going to the gym, and I've got like a really solid gym community that I really enjoy going to see, and that, you know, relaxes me. I enjoy being in those environments. I'm obviously a creative by sort of trade, but actually the amount of creativity I bring into my role, it is less now because I am MD and I'm running the whole business. So sometimes I have to remind myself that creativity is a massive sort of release for me. Certainly creatives, they kind of over-index in the creative industry, and also founders as well. So if you find creative founders, I can't remember the stats, but it's a really high percentage of creative founders have ADHD. There are lots of reasons for that. Some of it is that they couldn't fit elsewhere. They're unemployable. They get sacked if they go and work for other businesses. But the creativity and the ability to think broadly and scan really broadly is part of it, but the pattern spotting element is very strong. So you can find those weak signals. You can knit things together like AI and tarot dead quickly. It just seems really obvious to people who've got ADHD because their attention is spread so much, so they're kind of brailing things. I mean, there are obviously massive downsides as well, but I think from that perspective, yes, there's a sense of intuition, but I believe it to be the ability to spot patterns very, very quickly.
So you referred to the fact you've been in business for 27 years earlier, and it sounds as if your business is going well, and you know that's some of the sort of metrics of success. But like, what does success mean to you, and has that changed over the years?
Yeah, I think it changes now and again, actually. But the sort of core root of it, I think, for me is having freedom of choice. That's what it really means. It's being free to choose. And whether that is free to choose how I spend my time or free to choose what I do with the business. You know, if I want to change it from a consultancy into a subscription service, I have the freedom to explore those choices. I guess that freedom of choice extends into, I always take 6 weeks off every summer holidays to be with my kids when they're off school. I've just been off for half term. I'll be off again at Easter. It's so easy when you run a business to lose the things that you set it up for. And I set up my business so that I could have the flexibility for my family and be able to put them first. And so often you speak to founders who aren't getting any holiday at all and they're taking their laptops on holiday. I mean, I haven't taken my laptop on holiday for maybe like 12 years or something. It just wouldn't occur to me. I would never do that now. And I put my out of office on my phone. I move where the app is on my home screen, so I'm not, drawn into it every single day if I'm on holiday. And my team know that if there is a crisis, they would WhatsApp me, and they know what a crisis looks like to me. So that's if somebody's off long-term sick, if we lose a customer, if we have bad customer feedback, those things to me, I want to know about them if I'm on holiday. I really value that time off and I make myself have it. We have now got this kind of online HR system that has a burnout calculator on it. And we looked at it before Christmas, before we launched it live to the team. And my team said, well, there's no guessing who's at the top of the burnout calculator. And I was like, oh, who? And they said, well, it's you. And I was mortified. And I thought, I worked so hard to kind of role model how to take holidays, how to take time off. And yet still, and actually the calculation for burnout calculator is the time between the last holiday and the next holiday that's booked and planned.
Right.
But I thought I can't be at the top of that list. And that's when I booked in February half term, so that I could demonstrate to people, I'm taking my holiday, you must take yours. It's so important. And especially with my workforce where they're so dedicated and work really hard.
Absolutely critical. And again, to sort of reflect in the industry that I work in, like the lawyers work long hours a lot of the time. You know, it's part of the job if a client has a need and people have to do it. But, you know, you do have to take those breaks and you do the best work when you know, are rested and you've had that time to think. So, no, it's really important. It's something I try and work on with my team. But, you know, I've got some of the same things that you talked about before, really motivated people, really engaged people who want to be there all the time, kind of sometimes think that taking the laptop away is like a badge of honour sort of thing, but it isn't. You know, I get that there's times when people do need to, but that's not always the case. Moving on, you wrote a book, Trend Leader. Would you mind just letting us know a little bit about what the sort of motivation for doing that was, what you learned from it and what the sort of outcomes have been? Yeah,
I mean, I didn't sort of intend to write a book. My intention was to start to gather together what I've learned in all my years so that I could share it with my team. And I thought maybe if I could pull it into a PDF or something like that, I could explain to them all of the models that I've developed and the methods that I've used and the good client stories that we've got that help us understand the impact that trend forecasting can make. And I just, you know, did a bit of an ADHD thing and suddenly realised I've got this huge amount of information and knowledge to share. And actually, I think it can be more than a PDF. I think it could be client facing and I think it could be a book. So it evolved into a book by accident and became this huge project. And I did really just take, you know, look at what's the best practice of some of the world's biggest and best and most successful brands. What is it that they do and how do they use trends? How do they use what we give them to turn it into success? And so I interviewed a number of clients for that. I interviewed some amazing brands. I've interviewed people at Samsung and Netflix and Moonpig and asked all of their internal trend leaders, what is it that you look for and how do you spot change and how do you get the business to back you when you've seen that change is coming? So they're all featured in the book, and I took that along with everything else that I've learned and laddered it into 6 principles of trend leadership that any leader can access, because I think, you know, if there's one thing I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years is that all leaders, they need to be able to articulate what the future looks like for their business. And they need to have some of that is the possible and probable. These are the things we think will impact our business. And they also need to have the preferable, not just this is where I'd like the business to go, but this is where I see our future consumer going. And those things all have to knit together. That has to all group together. So every leader has to be good at trend forecasting now. And so it's an in-demand skill set that I think over the next 5-10 years will be super important. And we're already seeing things like chief futures officers being put into some of the world's most progressive brands. We're seeing universities hire sort of futures professionals where once they would have like an in-house entrepreneurial figure. Now that's got a futures focus to it as well. So we're starting to see these shifts that suggest that having an eye on the future and being able to work with it is a core skill set. And so I knew that was something that the book had to be a beginner's guide for people that had never used trend forecasting or futures before.
I mean, every business needs to have its strategy and needs to look forward and try and predict those things. Is there anything that you've learned over like the years of running a business that like you wish you knew at the start that would have made a massive impact?
I mean, so much,
right.
So much. And it probably, if you asked me last year, I'd say something different because every time I learn about something new, the last sort of 2 years for me has been learning about SaaS businesses, so software as a service, or what my business is more like a content as a service. So it's probably more similar to like a Netflix where you pay your subscription, but the content is fresh as you move forwards. So I've spent a lot of time learning about what is a SaaS business, what is a CaaS business, what does good retention look like, what does churn mean, how do you reduce churn, how do you stop people leaving your subscription. I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd known all of that years ago. And there's lots of information out there, lots of books you can read, lots of podcasts, but there are only so many hours you can devote to that knowledge. And then prior to that, I would have said marketing. I learned a lot probably 2 or 3 years ago about marketing. I have 2 excellent marketers in my business who really know their stuff. But actually, if you don't know your stuff with regards marketing as an MD, you can't really give the direction and the brief to the marketing team. So I think probably for them, it was a little bit of frustration that I did do a deep dive on marketing, but also it's a bit of a relief now that they can just come to me and say, we need to back this or we need to invest in this, because I get it now. I understand it a lot more. Prior to that, I would have said sales. There's a lot that I learned on sales. So just all of those commercial elements, I think you need to know about them all in depth yourself in order that you can lead well, I think.
No, I think you're right. It's one of the things, I've referred to the fact that my team's grown out, and there's 5 of us, so it's not a massive team. But I think within certainly the legal sector, like we've had business development people for a while, but it's still new to a lot of businesses. So I'm having conversations with colleagues at work about where we need to go and what we need from them. A lot of the time I'm the expert on it, so they have to kind of just trust that I know what I'm talking about, and that's not always an easy place to be. But I guess if you're more rounded and have those learnings about other bits, that really helps. So do you have any advice for other entrepreneurs and people that are growing businesses on like how to deal with the pace of change? Because you're predicting forward and you're looking at trends and things, but as we've discussed, things are changing rapidly and there's a lot going on, there's a lot to think about. So what's your advice to people on how to manage that?
I think it would come back to that autonomy piece. And quite often we have clients phone us up really worried about the pace of change. Too many things are changing too quickly. And I think you could be led to believe that the news cycle, the media, they benefit from that chaos and they can generate a lot of that chaos. And we live in a world where global news becomes local news, doesn't it? It's what we're consuming on a daily basis. We're seeing change, even if it isn't change on our doorstep or in our country, we're seeing change outside in the world, and we're assuming that change actually impacts us all of the time as well. It doesn't always. So I would say get really clear on what change you think is impacting your business. The thing that calms you down most about so much change is having key moments in the year where you actively down tools and you look at what is changing. And that is the first thing that I would put into a business is where are the 4 cornerstone moments. It could be like a quarterly check-in with one really big deep dive at the start of the year that just says, what change do we think is happening? How will that impact our business and our customer in the next year, in the next 3 to 5 years is typically what companies would do. But as soon as you've got a process for looking at change, it means that people start to gather evidence of that change as well. So if you know that every quarter the team are going to sit down and look at what's changing, what's happened since we last did a forecast, and is there anything new we want to add to that or take away from it? It just helps everybody have a system in place for looking at change rather than being pulled into the day-to-day of, there's a tariff change or there's something's happened in the American market or there's something happened in our economy here. You can get pulled into that, but actually if you've got the rhythm of those meetings through the year, it holds you tight to a system where you just feel automatically a little bit calmer about things. And in those meetings, it could be a day, could be a half day, but it's really important to sit down and analyse and think about and collect evidence of what you think is changing so that you feel held by that system as opposed to just drama happening every single day. It's not a good strategic way to operate.
So penultimate question from me. Hope that there's going to be business people and entrepreneurs and things listening to this. Are there any trends in business that you think people should be aware of at the moment?
I mean, we've talked a lot about AI, haven't we, really? And I think that's a really sort of obvious thing to say that AI is something that is impacting businesses. Businesses are using it more. But I would, again, just zoom out a little bit from that. And I would remember that AI is a tech trend and there is more happening in this world than just tech trends. And at the minute, we've got investors that want to invest in AI and invest in technology. We've got a huge percentage of people that get funded by VCs being in the world of tech because that's believed to be the next source of the next boom. But there's so much happening in the world outside of technology, and I just would advise everybody to have their heads up about that, because some of the change is sort of human change, not just this sort of lean into technology. So it's really important that, because, just to give you an example, every year some of the world's most prominent futurists meet in Dubai for the World Futures Forum. And from that gathering, the Dubai Futures Forum put out 50 trends from that event. And I can't remember what percentage, but a huge percentage of the trends they put out are tech trends. And that tells you a lot about what the thinking is, what the conversations are, the way that information's being gathered together. But there's more that's happening in the world than just technology trends at the moment. I think it's really important to stay tuned into that.
Okay. That's really useful. So last question from me. What does the sort of, what's the big vision for you now, and what's the vision for TrendBible moving forward?
I'm really excited about it at the minute. I think it really feels like, I don't know, maybe that's my intuition, my spidey senses tingling, but I just feel like we are really at the start of something very exciting now that we've fully transitioned into a subscription business. We've seen the response to that from a customer perspective. We've had a massive year of growth, which has been brilliant. And it feels like we've pulled all the right levers to get it to prove to us that this is the direction of the business. So it feels like now we just need to sell and market that and really turn that flywheel. It feels like we've got the traction. Now we're going to see the growth, and that's like really exciting for me. So, and it's lovely after 5 years of sort of struggling and what happens if and how might we. It just feels like we've reached the top of that hill, and we're starting to really take off now. So it's really exciting.
It does sound genuinely really exciting, and it's been excellent to hear a lot about how your business is developing. I think if I'm going to wrap things up and sort of reflect on what we've talked about, I think one of the things that I think is great is such an exciting, what to me feels like quite a unique kind of business that does this work with billion-dollar businesses. Being based in the Northeast is brilliant, and I think that's really, really healthy for sort of next generation of people coming through, and people understanding that there are phenomenal businesses in the Northeast that yes, go and experience things and live in other parts of the world, but you don't have to do that. Like you can stay in the Northeast and have a great career, doing something really, really fascinating like that. I think it's been nice to hear about your ADHD stuff. You sometimes hear people say, "Oh, it's a superpower" and things like that, and that can be a bit patronising, I think. And it's not a way that I would choose to describe it, but it is great to see that you've utilised it, and there's elements of your ADHD that have informed how you do your work and helped you to do the kind of work that you do. So I think that's great. I'm really grateful that you've spoken about that. I think from a professional point of view, I do think we should have a conversation, because that pivoting in your business to the subscription model and the success that you've had, I think we're seeing early signs of that in our sector. And I think if we're looking forward, I think increasingly the age of the entrepreneurs that we look after, whether that's in lots of the tech businesses that we work with, or just generally the age profile of our clients is coming down. And it's just been fascinating to hear about your work and what you do. So thanks very much indeed for that. If other people are equally interested about what you've said today, and it's triggered off something that I want to talk to you about work-wise, where would people find you, and if they've got inquiries and things?
The best place is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I try and share as much as possible on there. And in my LinkedIn banner, there's also a little QR code in there as well, which people can scan, and it will allow you to take a little quiz, which will allow you to investigate how sort of future ready your business is. And you can even evaluate your own skill set as a trend leader on there as well. So it's Joanna Feeley on LinkedIn.
Right. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That was great.
Thanks so much.